Welcome to the Beth Yeshua Podcast. For more episodes like this, visit bethyeshua.org/media.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Beth Yeshua Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Josh Rubenstein, and I'm here with my other co-host, Shari Rubenstein. Hi, Mom.
Hi, dear. Good to be here.
And today we're going to dig into some of the new Kesher. So this is a journal of Messianic Judaism, so it's like kind of a scholarly journal for people who are wanting to write scholarly pieces and kind of dig into what Messianic Judaism is, and for it to be published in a journal, really to be made available, I think, to people that are interested in digging into some of those deeper issues. Wouldn't you say, Mom?
I would say so,
That's kind of
yes.
what it's about. It's published by the Messianic Jewish Theological Institute, the MJTI, which is one of the different education, like kind of upper, higher level education entities of Messianic Judaism. And the MJTI is what I've done some of my smicha training through, some of my rabbinic ordination training through. And I know that some of the classes that you took for your madrika, those were also MJTI teachers, I think, right?
Yes.
Some of the teachers
Yes.
that you had? Yeah.
Yes.
And so many of those MJTI teachers are actually well-respected rabbis within the movement who have been around for a long time. But it's kind of weird, guys. Like, if you've been following the podcast for a minute, they're talking about a panel discussion about continuity of Jewish identity and Jewish continuity within Messianic Judaism as a whole. And then patrilineal descent. And should patrilineal descent be part of Jewish identity within Messianic Judaism, or just at all within the greater Jewish world, which is kind of hilarious because that's two things that we've spoken about pretty recently.
Yes.
And here we are diving into it again. Well, as always, if you want to see us and not just listen to us, you can go to our YouTube channel. That's Beth Yeshua Sac, which is short for Sacramento. We're located in Sacramento, California. Sunny Sacramento, California today. It's actually a nice sunny day after the rain that we've been having, which we're grateful for. We're grateful for the rain. And you can find us there. And if you want to learn more about our community, you can go to bethyeshua.org. So, you were the one, actually, Mom, that recommended this Kesher to me. You're like, hey, Josh, did you see the newest Kesher? Because they're writing about all the stuff we've been talking about.
Well, they must have been writing about it for months and months.
Right.
So even while we were talking about it, I mean, I'm not suggesting that they listen to us, but
Right.
I think it's interesting that this is what's kind of in the air within Messianic Judaism right now, very pointedly, and especially what Russ brings up as with that panel discussion, and that is, where's the continuity? Is there continuity? Will there be continuity of
Right.
the Messianic Jewish movement going forward? Is it a multi-generational? Is it capable of going into multiple generations?
Yeah. And I've read part of that piece. So let's address that one first. Why don't we dig into that one? So this one, for those of you following at home with your own Kesher, you might want to pause and read through the panel discussion, Jewish Continuity Within Messianic Judaism. And this is a panel facilitated by Russ Resnick, who's the editor-in-chief of this journal, but also a rabbi himself and kind of the rabbi emeritus of the UMJC, if you will, certainly the rabbinic advisor who goes out and works with communities. And he basically, in this, as it breaks down, he is Kesher. He's indicated by Kesher. And then he has several people that he interviews here. It's Sean and Eric and Elisa and Stephanie that he goes into. And he kind of has these four different young voices, if you will, certainly younger than the older generation of Messianic Judaism, right?
I do think young is so relative, really, because at least one of them said they've been married 21 years, and one of them's talking about her grandkids are not practicing Jewish identity.
Right.
And I'm thinking, okie dokie. All right. For
But
me,
I think
they're
that
young.
was more like
They're
hypothetical.
young.
I don't think she was actually talking about her own grandchildren, that one.
Oh,
I think she
okay,
was talking
maybe
about
not.
would her grandchildren. And I haven't read through all of this, full disclosure. I've read just enough of this to be really, really curious about it, and I want to go back and read some more. But I do have some distinct ideas from some of the things that were brought up in this panel. So maybe just like kind of off the bat, Mom, like as you read through, because you read through the entire thing, what was like your big takeaways, or what was the overall tone, or like for you when you read through it, did it kind of reinforce the things that we've been talking about, or was it different somehow? Like, how did this article strike you?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, I think basically it was hitting on all the same topics that we've been hitting on. It's looking at mixed marriages. Several of these are mixed marriages. Some of them are even multicultural, and just bringing forth all that brings into a discussion. Right. So it's not just two identifiably Jewish parents raising children necessarily, but even though there's a couple of them I think that is true, but that the same issues that we're dealing with, people today across the country are dealing with.
Yes.
And around the world, I would say, because
yes.
The UMJC for sure, and Messianic Judaism is around the world. But things such as how do we improve multi-generational continuity? What can we do? And I think that has to necessarily deal with mixed marriages, because the tendency is for it to be children of mixed marriages who tend to then have a mixed marriage, and then there's a tendency to get further and further away from that Jewish identity. And so there's...
And it is interesting, like if we were just looking at we have to kind of glean it from what they are willing to share, but each of them, it looks like, at least as far as the ones that made it clear, are from an intermarried parent, like their parents are intermarried.
Yes.
And so
yes.
at least three of them. Yeah, at least three of them,
yes.
And the fourth one is unclear.
Yes.
And then, yes, like at least a couple of them talk about their own intermarriages,
right.
marrying people that are not Jewish. So you're right. There's and if their children also intermarry, it's that weird game of quote unquote percentages, right? Of like, how Jewish am I versus all the other cultures that I am, and will I identify with that? Is it something that's like strongly reinforced within my family? I think that actually many of them brought up that was the key.
Yes. Well, I think all of them are saying that, but maintaining Jewish identity is very, very complex, and
yes.
even outside of Messianic Judaism.
Yes.
I think within Reform Judaism, isn't it something like 80% or higher that there are intermarrieds?
I don't know.
I
don't know.
I would have to go back. I think there was a Pew study on that, and I'm not remembering what the statistics were on that. But some of the classic kind of things happened here. Is it okay to mention these first names, because they don't really say their last names?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm pointing at Eric. He said he was born, this is on page 3, if those of you have a Kesher. I was born and raised in a Messianic Jewish community. Actually, my dad, who's Gentile, grew up Christian, and my mom is Jewish, and she came to faith through his witness. Mm-hmm. So, we're kind of seeing a classic thing of what is the Jew supposed to be. The Jewish person is supposed to be a light to Gentiles, and the Gentile is supposed to provoke the Jew to jealousy. So I'm not sure exactly, he doesn't elaborate how that comes about, but I think one of the points here is that Eric says, and I don't remember which page this is on. I think it's maybe on about page 13, but Eric says that his dad was willing to allow a commitment to the Jewish identity for the family. His willingness. So as a non-Jewish person marrying in, regardless what his background has been, he sees it as an important thing that the children identify as being Jewish.
Right.
It's back to what you said about it being in the home. What's going on in the home? That would be what is going on in that home. They're walking it, they're talking it, they're eating their way through the holidays. And in this case, it is a father who is the non-Jewish one, which I think is extremely significant, because the father, being what we would consider to be the spiritual head of the home, for him, some people might think he's abdicating, but he's basically saying this takes precedence. Mm-hmm. Jewish identity takes precedence in this family. And any others, they're still there, but they're not put in that primary position.
I think it was interesting too, in addition to it being like a very purposeful choice, and I think multiple of them touched on it. There was the constant decision, and you even referenced it, of like the Jewish calendar will be our calendar at home. We will have Shabbat meals together. The one who I think has the strongest Jewish identity, although all four of them I think have a strong Jewish identity, said that they really believed that, like, because they had been raised at like a Messianic Jewish school even, and they had gone to Jewish summer camps, and so like even though they were coming from an intermarried family, like that Jewish identity was constantly reinforced by everything that they did.
Yes. Well, which really does inform us into how can we best serve intermarried families. First of all, we have to try to, and this was brought out, do we want to make a big deal about delineating who is Jewish and who is not? And several of them have said yes. It is a very important thing that we do, but how we do it is critical. Because how do we make sure that people understand the significance of the Jewish identity without it making the non-Jewish identity being something secondary and not as desirable? And that has been our challenge, I think, all along. But what can we do to essentially encourage especially within a mixed marriage, encourage the non-Jewish one that their role is vital, absolutely vital. But as I said before, their role is less about what they do, but where they're willing to yield. If they are willing to yield their kind of right to, particularly if it's a man, to the spiritual headship within that family, and say he was raised as Episcopalian or a Christian at or even an atheist, whatever he was raised to be, that should or could take precedence in what goes on in that family. But for that person to yield, I think it's part of how women were created, that yielding is a part of who we are. And I don't mean that in any negative sense whatsoever. But I think for a man to do that, it takes such strength for a man who's married into a Jewish family to make sure that family keeps its identity.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because it begins to move even away from that individual family into our congregations as a whole.
Right.
Because we often have three distinct groups that are at Beth Yeshua, for example, on any given Shabbat. We have, and not many, but we have like one family where both of the parents are Jewish and have...
Actually, two families.
Do we?
But one doesn't have children yet.
Oh.
I didn't want to mention. Yeah.
Who's the other family? Goodness.
Okay. My grandson.
Oh, right. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Yeah. I was forgetting. I was like, oh my goodness. I'm really blanking.
Who is this? Okay, sorry.
As the leader of the community, man, that's pretty awkward. Okay. Yeah.
No.
And then
that's
we have.
It's really within our family too. Really.
Yeah. And so then we have that one group, right? And then we have another group, which is people who are intermarried, right?
Correct.
And then we have another group within the community, which is entirely Gentile families. And within that, we have people who think that they are Jewish. And so part of them wanting to come to Beth Yeshua is maybe a reinforcing of that identity or like something like that. And we can talk about that. But then the other ones are like, no, we're definitely not Jewish. And we know we're not Jewish and we're not trying to be Jewish and we're here to yield, which was, I think, kind of like one of the interesting words that you use, to yield kind of like our own preferences and our own druthers because we believe in what God is doing here among the Jewish people, which I thought is, man, that's really profound. So you got four different groups, and so they brought this up, the panel did.
Yes.
When they were talking about should there be a clear delineation between Jewish people and non-Jewish people within the community. What should that look like? They talked especially about the identity confusion that tends to happen in children and teenagers who grow up in communities where there is not a clarity, there's not a clear halakha of who's considered Jewish within the community. And so kind of people self-identify and self-define, and then they go off to college and they're kind of like way up in the air because they don't know what they are. And of course, it also messes with entire families, which we've seen. We've seen entire families come to Beth Yeshua, and we've seen people renounce their faith in Yeshua and convert to Orthodox Judaism. We've seen people who, because we wouldn't recognize them as Jewish, they went someplace where they would be recognized as Jewish, and if they were willing to convert, they were willing to convert. So this is it's really interesting. They start with the place of can Jewish identity continue? Can we actually have a meaningful Messianic Judaism where, and I think one of the questions that was asked was not whether or not their grandchildren will be believers, but whether or not their grandchildren will be Jews, identifiably Jewish, right? Because there is that tendency for many of them to intermarry and to kind of drift off into the church. Although, statistically, the big concern right now is that young people are just drifting off into nothing, right? They're just, no matter where they come from, they're kind of drifting off into nothing. And
actually, Stephanie talks about that a lot. She says that that whole confusion that can go on with kids within a Messianic congregation has led to them, once they grow up, essentially, to take off completely. Not necessarily take off and go to the church, but just to take off. Right. And that not even into a church, which, if that's where they feel like they want to worship, it's still all about God, right? Right. But that Jewish identity is not there. And she is also the one who said it's very important to draw the distinctions. She said, do your non-Jewish children have a bar or bat mitzvah, or do they have a confirmation? Right. And she said, that within their congregation, that the non-Jewish children have a confirmation, which we do in our congregation as well. And then who should wear a tallis? Right. And in fact, I think it was interesting that Eric brought up the point of, he said, if some congregations hang the talitot in the foyer. So people coming in would put one on, and they would think they're supposed to be putting one on. And Eric's point is, well, maybe we should label those, and for some it would be Jewish men only, and for some it would be just Jewish persons only. I think our stand is men and women who are Jewish would wear a tallis in the service. But
our halakha as our congregation, yeah.
Our congregation. But then even who has a bris? How many Messianic families have we had talk to us where, I'm saying Messianic in the sense that that's the way they've chosen to worship, but they're fully Gentile, but they want to have a bris for their sons. And it's confusing. It's like, what.
And it gets into this interesting place. I was listening to the Messianics podcast. Have you listened to that one yet, Bobby?
I have. Not lately, but yes.
Okay. And Rabbi Eric and some of the other guys, they were talking about Acts 15. And they were talking about observance, writ large within Messianic communities, and that we have this tendency to make, some communities are making maybe too harsh of a distinction between Jew and Gentile as far as observance within their communities, where there might actually be quite a bit of overlap. And for the most part, I agree with them. But I didn't finish listening to that podcast, just like I didn't finish reading this article. My life is too crazy right now, but I really want to get back to it because there are some things that are identifiers and markers of the Jewish people.
Yes.
And there are some commandments that are given to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not just the descendants of Abraham. And then there are some commandments that are given specifically to Kohanim, to the priest class. And then there are there are specific commandments that are given to men. There are specific commandments that are given to women. And so I was really curious in their conversation, were they going to get to the point of yes, but there still has to be some distinction. So for example, in our community, we have decided that only people who are identifiably Jewish, according to our halakha, will be invited to make an aliyah to Torah, to come
Correct.
up and to read the Torah scroll. A lot of people, I think, would look at that, especially a lot of people that have grown up within the lens of church. They would look at that through the lens of like, that's discriminatory. That's you making an
Exclusive.
artificial
Yeah,
distinction. That's you not being loving. And I'm like, man, it's not loving to treat my daughter the same way I treat my son. They're two different people, right? And there's different responsibilities, within the Word of God that are given to different groups. Paul writes about this in the book of Romans, right? He says
Right.
that like the burden of Torah, or like the responsibility of Torah, is still upon the Jewish people. Like that's something that we can't avoid. That's part of who we are. And so we have this tendency, I think, to be kind of like politic with the way that we look at our communities, and we want everybody to feel equal and everybody to feel welcome. And it is hard to have distinction and communicate equality of value, which, man, we've talked about probably too many times
equal
in this
versus
podcast.
same. I mean, people feel like they have to be the same in order to be equal, and it's not true.
And I don't know
it's
how.
totally not true.
I don't know how to teach it better. Like we used to have Messy 101 where we would teach it to the community. Jews and Gentiles were equal in value before God. There are different roles. There's different things for them to do. But even then, people would push back. Well, what does that mean that we're like equal or we're not equal, right? And then there was like beyond that, there was like we would have times of conversation with the community when we were developing our halakha of like, well, this is who we're going to consider to be a Jew, and this is who we're not going to be considering a Jew, and this is why, and this is how it aligns with the greater Jewish world, and there would be pushback against that. And it feels to me like we're so constantly caught in this like this push and pull of non-Jewish people and Jewish people occupying the same space at the same time, and what should their roles be, that we never actually get to what should Messianic Judaism be. Instead, we're often dealing with like defining what people can wear or who can read from the scroll, instead of like the call for us to actually like reach the Jewish people in our lives with the Besorah, with the good news, that there is a Jewish Messiah, that he has come, that they can have intimacy with him, that they don't lose their Jewish identity by believing in him. Oh man, and I don't know what to do with that. And like they hit it so hard in this, because all of these people who are considered young within the movement, all of them said that at their congregations where they grew up or where they currently were, this confusion was an issue. And it was even something that Rabbi Kirk brought up at the winter conference of this is driving young people away from our movement. It's something that when they experience the craziness, they don't know what to do with that, and they don't know how to process it. And our movement needs to, I think, grow in clarity of communication of what Messianic Judaism is and what it's called to be, and the roles of Jews and Gentiles, and that it is not a derogatory term to call somebody a Gentile. I don't care what it was in the past. Calling somebody a non-Jew or a Gentile is just bringing up a reality in their lives, which we have to bring up.
It's a distinction. It's a distinction, and that's the big issue.
The church doesn't have to bring it up because everybody's just a Christian there. Like, it doesn't matter. They're not trying to preserve Jewish identity. If they were trying to preserve Jewish identity for their Jewish members, oh man, can you imagine the conversations that they would be getting into of like, well, I don't know, maybe Adam Berkowitz does need to wrestle with Torah and circumcising his sons. Like, maybe that's actually something that he needs to do, even though he loves Yeshua. And like, that's nobody has that conversation. And so it feels unfair to Gentiles when we have that conversation, and yet
they're not going to get it anywhere else. There is no other place.
This is the reality of our space. And all of them go into it in this Kesher article of like, who is this space for then? And if we're going to be able to transmit Jewish identity and clarity to multiple generations, but we can't even define who a Jew is, oh man, like you're lost. Like you've already sunk the ship. There's nowhere for you to go.
Yeah. And it kind of comes back to that, how we're all one in Messiah. Yes. Right. Because there's only one, quote, church, or one, shall I say,
body
congregation.
of Messiah,
There's one body that God that the Lord is coming back for.
That's
We
right.
understand that, and we're all part of that group. But at the same time, I think a couple of them brought up that too, that somehow we're even bringing up the one new man more in our synagogues, our Messianic synagogues, than churches are bringing it up. I don't think we're hearing the church world saying, hey, we are Jew and Gentile together serving. They don't do that. As you said, if you're in the church, you're in the church, you're a Christian, and that just solves everything, and there is no deeper or no further distinction. So
The one new man thing is interesting. Eric, and
Yeah.
I'm just going to
Eric,
quote him
yeah,
here.
go ahead,
This is
yeah.
on page 12, and he talks about the one new man. He says, to maybe tie some of these things together, the Gentile identity confusion that in many ways we have caused shows the potency of Jewish ritual, Jewish rhythms of life, and Jewish community. That is how I would respond to the Jewish person who says we shouldn't do the traditions, we're one new man, we shouldn't have these distinctions. Now, this is interesting because he brings it up from the Jewish perspective of like, hey, I'm a Jew, I'm free, I don't need to do these things anymore. That's not what's happening within our community. We don't have a whole lot of Jewish people who are like, I should throw away the traditions, but we have a lot of Gentile people who say like, I should be lighting candles on Friday night.
right.
And it's like,
right.
really, is that how a Gentile should celebrate like Shabbat? Anyways, so he says, that is how I would respond to a Jewish person who says we shouldn't do the traditions, we're one new man, we shouldn't have these distinctions. Jewish tradition has had thousands of years to fine-tune its ability to instill and strengthen Jewish identity. For this reason, Jewish followers of Yeshua who care about having Jewish children and grandchildren should engage with Jewish tradition. On the one hand, we need to be careful about how we navigate Gentiles engaging in Jewish tradition in our communities because that tradition is designed to instill and strengthen Jewish identity. I've heard of Messianic Gentiles feeling insecure or uncertain in their Gentile identity, which in some ways comes as no surprise because they're
Right.
engaging in traditions and a culture that strengthen Jewish identity specifically. This even leads to some Gentiles leaving their faith and converting to Judaism to find identity security. And I think that's something that we need to take a lot more seriously. Now, the interesting thing here is there's a traditional prayer that happens at the end of the Shachrit service. It's the Aleinu, right? I know this is going to sound so controversial, and I'm sure some Messianic rabbi online could absolutely roast me. And okay, I'm here for it. The Aleinu is a unifying prayer about Jewish identity and the calling of the Jewish people. And if you look at like the words of the Aleinu, I'm just going to Google this really quick. The Aleinu words. If I could just actually find the Aleinu really quick here.
I have a Siddur here.
Yeah. Do you have the Siddur? Yeah, here we
I-
go. It is our obligation to
okay.
praise the Master of all, to ascribe greatness to the Creator of the world in the beginning, that He has not made us like the nations of the lands, and has not positioned us like the families of the earth, that He has not assigned our portion like theirs, nor our lot like that of all their multitudes. For they prostrate themselves to vanity and nothingness and pray to a God that cannot deliver. But we bow, prostrate ourselves, and offer thanks before the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is He, who spreads the heavens and establishes the earth. And so you get the idea of obviously what I'm going at, which is this is literally a prayer saying, God, you have established the Jewish people to not be Gentiles. You've established us actually to worship the one true God. Right? Now, there are a lot of Gentiles who are worshiping the one true God. But when you pray the prayer of the Aleinu, you're bonding yourself in that ritual and that tradition that Eric talks about that the Jewish people have done for centuries, which is the call to corporate identity of this is our calling and our task as Jews. We're going from here to be a light to the nations and to worship the one true God, even if everybody else is worshiping a pagan God. I actually stopped us at some point from praying this prayer together because it was a room full of like 60% Gentiles saying, thank you, God, for not making us Gentiles.
I know. People wondered why. I mean, that's also one of the points that these panelists bring up is just how much liturgy do we have that is similar to what would be in Jewish tradition. But there's reasons for not having some of the liturgical aspects.
Well, and that's hard. So, like,
yeah,
like in an actual synagogue, there's no confusion. A Gentile who shows up knows that they're a Gentile, right? And a Jew knows that they're a Jew. So when they say the Aleinu, it's reinforcing the identity for the correct people, and it's not reinforcing the incorrect one for the others. We will always, as long as we are a mixed multitude, we will always have this reality of a bunch of people in the room who are in different places. And so prayers like this. So is it wrong to stop that prayer because it's reinforcing a broken identity in Gentiles, many of whom are striving for an identity that is not theirs, and to take that away from those Jewish people when it is actually like one of like the central prayers of Jewish
to
life.
Reinforce their identity.
Right, to reinforce their identity.
Yeah.
Is it wrong for us to do that and to we've had to change then our Jewish corporate worship and tradition so that we don't have as much, confusion. And we've erred majorly on that side because I was the leader of the youth at Beth Yeshua for a long time, and it broke my heart how many of those kids were absolutely confused, often by their own parents, as to what their identity was. And so I couldn't in good conscience say we're going to break identity clarity for an entire community consistently. That's why we had to have a halakha for who is a Jew. That's why we have to have distinction within our corporate worship. And I know that it rubs people the wrong way. And at this point, I am also a little bit like, but Messianic Judaism is in some ways a flipped ratio from what it should be. I feel like it should be 80% Jewish people in the room. And if it was 80% Jewish people, then saying the Aleinu wouldn't be an issue, and transmitting Jewish identity from generation to generation wouldn't be as big of an issue. But like for my children, they are going to struggle in their Jewish identity because they do not know other normative Jewish kids who love Yeshua.
Which gets back to a lot of Rabbi Glevy's points about how it's so important that we get them to mingle with each other, to take them to the camps where they're not camps, but you know what I'm saying, to the youth camps where they can meet other Messianic believers. Because I think it's very difficult in our congregation, even with teaching at the various levels of the kids. And I look at like the toddler program right now. There are very few kids, but it's actually 2/3 Jewish. But basically it's just your family and one other family that has children in the youth and in the children's that are Jewish families. The others are not Jewish families. Fortunately, one of those families is a very, very healthy non-Jewish family, and
very clear about identity.
Very clear, and I believe they're very, very clear with their kids about who they are. And how important it is for who they are that they be where they are. Yeah. And, of course, that family is extremely involved in the congregation and has strong voice in the congregation, which they should. I think they can be a family that validates others who are just want to be Messianic believers in a sense, not necessarily ordering their home as a Jew might be in terms of the identifiers, the circumcision, the ways of eating, who has a bar mitzvah, any of those things, but more about supporting. I'm here to support you as Jewish people to have that identity because it's important to God that you have that identity. It's important to all of us. We got to get down to the bottom line of the dry bones being raised, right?
Right. And I don't know. I don't know that what I'm seeing of Messianic Judaism, man, I would love to just take a year and go to every Messianic congregation in the United States. I would love to be a fly on the wall and see what the real culture is, because I feel like we've made some major changes in our community over the last 10 or so years. And I'm wondering if those changes, especially reading this article, because there's a mixture of MJAA and UMJC.
Right. It's not just UMJC.
I'm wondering if there's starting to be a little bit of a sea change for, clarity of identity and clarity of purpose. And I don't know, like the Messianic Judaism that I saw in the past is not up to the task of transmitting Jewish value to the second and third generation, because I don't think that they're up to the task of having clarity of identity at all. You have people coming in and saying, I'm Jewish and I'm going to wear a tallis, and like, what are you going to tell me? And there's that too, man, where people come into a community and they're like, this is my walk with God, so who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do? And it's like, well, that's fine for you to do in your home, but this is an actual corporate worship space, and we have a set structure of how we're going to go about it. But yeah, like, I don't know if I'd really love to know. I think Rabbi Russ has seen a lot more of this than other people. He actually brought that up, like in the article.
Yeah, Eric makes some points on page 14 and 15. He has studied 30 different congregations. He's made it a project, a little side project. He's been going into Messianic services. He's been watching them online. He's looking to see how much liturgy they use and kind of where they are in terms of Jewish identity and what they're transmitting to their bodies. And he was saying that to quote him, the vast majority of them would not be equipped to step into a conservative synagogue and participate, by and large, with the service, which is kind of a Jewish experience in itself. And he's not necessarily saying that that's our job to prepare Messianic Jews to step into a conservative service and feel totally at home. But he's saying that there is so little liturgical presence literacy, liturgical literacy happening in Messianic Jewish congregations for at least these 30 that he has checked out. And what does that say? Okay, so that's saying, I think it's saying what you were saying, that we're almost like bending over backwards to try to take those things out, or like as in with the Elenu, deciding this is not appropriate. Why am I reading this? Why are we all reading this together saying, I'm glad God didn't make me a Gentile, so to speak, right?
I also do think that there's a problem of liturgical literacy among leaders. And like some of the leaders have gone and gotten smicha and gotten training and studied Hebrew deeply and like know the traditional prayers. Some don't. I myself am fairly ignorant of the lots of the Siddur that we don't traditionally pray. And so when I go and like daven shachrit, for example, with a minyan at a conference, there's a lot of the prayers that I don't recognize, right? And a lot of that kind of goes back, I think, also to the way in which modern Messianic Judaism came to be. A lot of the Jewish leaders of the movement, and you've even studied this as you've been writing that screenplay, a lot of them didn't necessarily have a strong Jewish identity until they came to faith in Messiah, and Messiah made it clear like that Jewish identity is important to me, and then they went back and educated themselves later. And so like the communities that they even founded at the beginning probably didn't have a high liturgical literacy. And then there's like real purposeful philosophical choices of like, how much do you want it to be an only Hebrew experience for the sake of people understanding what they're praying, which is something that we've
gone back and forth on that. We've done it where we've just done the Hebrew, and then we've gone back to interpreting, to interpreting it all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder about that too. I mean, we would have more time within our service. I don't want to go longer than an hour and a half for our service, but we'd have longer if we didn't read the English translation. If instead we just sang the prayers together and like recited the liturgy together, like so it would be a different experience. But that's interesting that he's studied that, and I think he's absolutely right, because basically when I step into one of those minions, I'm stepping into a conservative experience, and there's a lot of it that I just don't know. My literacy isn't high enough. It's part of what I was wanting with going and doing smicha, was just to become more literate. Within the traditions of my people and be able to really stand in that place. It's why in some ways I have trouble calling myself a rabbi, because like, yes, I'm leading a community, but like there are still major gaps in my knowledge that somebody that's actually gone all the way through yeshiva would not have. And I think that that's something that needs to change. It's one of the things I love about the MJTI, the Messianic Jewish Theological Institute, is that their desire is for rabbis to be liturgically literate, to know the life
Yes,
cycles
of
of the
course.
Jewish people, to
Right.
know the prayers of our people, to know how to stand, to know how to arrange it for, for Shiva when people pass, to understand how to lead, like, mourner's Kaddish at a graveside. Like, those are, I think, important things that, like, need to be expectations, especially if we're going forward and we're wanting to transmit Jewish identity. Like, it matters how much Jewish identity the leadership of
Yes.
the community have.
Yes, yes, it does. No, I found I found several things from this study that was really just kind of affirming or confirming some of the same issues that we're having. And frankly, for this journal to accept this article, even though I don't know if it was Russ's idea to do it, but being the editor, but try to get these voices heard. And I think, didn't you encounter that in this latest leadership conference you attended?
Yeah.
That it's, and the point is even brought out in here, how much of this conversation are people willing to have, and what is the end result of that? But I think what they're all saying is we've got to be willing to have this conversation, even if it's awkward. And then we have to go the extra mile in making sure that we're not killing people off in the process. And we're not putting too heavy of expectations on Jewish people, too, to wrestle with their identity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't want, we want to make sure that we're distinct in what we're saying. This is the age in this world of distinctions are always negative, and that's not okay.
I know.
And that's feeding into this. All the distinctions that God made on purpose, that there's this push. Now, those aren't real distinctions. We can just muddy it all, and we're not this or that. We're all just kind of gray smudges or whatever, But at any rate, I think one thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I remember when we had Linda Levy. Remember teaching that class, the Jewels of the Nations.
Yep.
Is that, I can't remember
Crowning
the exact
Jewels
title.
of the Nations.
Crowning Jewels of the Nations.
Yeah.
And that was meant to kind of affirm why a non-Jewish person would be at Beth Yeshua and what is their role. But I will say this, I think most of the people we were aiming that course toward are people in mixed marriages, which I think we must help. We must help.
Actually,
more so
like,
than,
when we had her step up into that, we were wanting her to really be able to talk to the all Gentile families.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is that, like,
yes.
as she
And she's
started
from a mixed
talking
marriage.
more and more,
Yeah.
we found that many of those Gentile families, all Gentile families, did not want to stay and listen to what she was teaching.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
It's interesting, and this is the other thing that I wanted to go back to really quickly, but you talked about this, you kind of hit upon it from the Winter Leadership Conference, and it made me think about how, isn't it so funny, and I want to get to the Leadership Conference in a second. I'm trying to gather this so that's one thread. Isn't it funny that in this article about how can we raise Jewish grandchildren, they spend so much time talking about Gentiles.
I know. Thank you. Yeah.
And it's like, instead of how can a healthy Jewish community pass on Jewish identity to the Jewish people inside of that Jewish community, instead it's about the Gentiles. And I just thought that was really interesting. And it brings me back to what happened at the Winter Leadership Conference. If I could be, this is an extreme summation? An extreme summation of what Rabbi Kirk said. He got up and he said, guys, the identity crisis is confusing and polluting our movement, and it's making young people want to leave. Then the sitting president was offended by this and stood up and said, as long as I am president of the UMJC, Gentiles will be welcome here. And he said more than that, but that was basically like how dare you say
he misunderstood
Gentiles, right?
his
How dare
point.
you say that Gentiles are not welcome? And then Rabbi Stewart got up and said, that is not what Rabbi Kirk was saying. What Rabbi Kirk was saying was that the reasons that Gentiles are in the room matter.
Yes.
And he said many other things. In fact, they had to turn off his mic at some point because he just wouldn't stop talking. But like, that's the reality of everywhere we have a conversation, the issue of Jew and Gentile, like even in our podcast, what are we doing? Like this is the 17th episode, if that, and it always comes back to this.
Yes.
Always, always, always. No,
Yeah.
we're not here like, hey, let's brainstorm ways that we can really make ourselves a viable option for intermarried families when they're looking for a place to worship when they have
Which
children.
is a great conversation to have.
You know, like that.
Yeah.
And like, how do we do that? And how have we failed with the intermarried couples and families that we already know, and they don't want to come to Beth Yeshua? And man, part of me just really, really, really wants to call them up and like, can I just have an hour of why? Can you break down for me why you left? I would really love to know, because
Or why you've never come, even.
or why
You
you've
know,
never
we
come
have
for
those
some of them,
too.
right?
Yeah.
But like, I'd really like to know, like, and I don't want us to bend over backwards and change who we are philosophically in order for us to attract people. I'm not interested in us being like seeker friendly, but also I'm interested in us fulfilling our mandate before God, which is
Right.
to reach Jewish people. And these families are having Jewish children, at least in my opinion. We could get into patrilineal descent in a second, but
Yeah.
like, I believe whether the mother's Jewish or the father is Jewish, these are Jewish kids, and I
Well,
want
that
those Jewish kids.
UMJC, that's our stance.
That's
Male, paternal or maternal
Yes,
descent.
and I
Yeah.
want to reach those kids and reach those families, and I also want to like help with those non-Jewish people in the marriage of like,
Oh, absolutely.
you're not lesser, and like no matter how much you say not lesser, people don't hear it. All they hear is different means lesser.
I know.
And I think some of that is just because of the wording in the Torah, right? Like, you know, I have called Israel my beloved, like she is my chosen, like, you know what I mean? Like it's this wedding metaphor, it's this bridal metaphor that comes back over and over and over
That's
again
right.
in the prophets and in Moses and in his writings. And so it's like I understand that to not be part of that would seem not as valuable, but we also have all of the Brit Chadashah that reinforces the amazing identity and value of the nations, and like all of us together as a one royal priesthood, holy and devoted to
Right.
God, right? And so like we have so much more than just the Torah, and yet, man, well, it's the same thing that's happening in our society today, isn't it? Where people don't feel like they have value unless like they're exactly the same as like so and so. It's that weird part of communism
Yeah.
that wants to cut everybody down
Yes,
to the
it
same
is.
level instead of
Right.
celebrating all the uniqueness
Vive
and
la
allowing
différence.
this person to be stellar in their area and to be
Yeah.
rewarded for that. But instead, let's just like chop everything off, which honestly I feel like
Well, it's certainly
is
not
ploy of the
American.
enemy. It's not American, but I think it's not
Definitely not
godly.
American.
It's like not
That's
a
not
celebration of like all of my kids are different, and shame on me if I would change my love based on who they are and what their gifts and their callings are. Like no parent should have a favorite. That's godless. Like I don't believe in that. Like it's not how God himself operates. He doesn't place value on what we do, but we are it's just this ache inside of us to prove our worthiness to God, to behave in just the right ways, which is why so many people come to us too, because we're saying things in Hebrew and we're worshiping on the right days. And so this is the place where they can be maximally pleasing to God. And it's heartbreaking.
I think it is interesting that the way we are to show ourselves approved unto God is by study. By study, you know, which I was thinking of that as you were talking,
like that. That's
but
good.
to me, it's more studying who God is, not who we are.
That's right.
It's
Right.
not focused on us. I thought I wanted to mention one more thing that I thought was important in the very last page of the article. Elisa makes a point. She says, I mean, they're talking about how Messianic congregations have become the hub, so to speak, of those who are trying to talk about the one new man. It's not discussed in the church. It's not discussed in the church. And Elisa says, I think the more that we can also connect with the church and be together as one body in Messiah and coordinate activities with the church, the less our own Messianic communities become this hub of one new man. Rather, this larger body of Messiah becomes a depiction of one new man, which I thought is an interesting perspective we haven't really looked at. But do we have an obligation to reach out to our Gentile, and I am Gentile, and I will reinforce that, but do we have an obligation to reach out to our Gentile brethren and help them understand where they all fit in the one new man?
You're talking about within the church.
Within the church, and not just it being something that people have to come to us to find out about.
Right.
And we're having to emphasize it because we're trying to help them understand why they feel like they're supposed to be there. Right. I mean, we need, as a Messianic synagogue, I believe that we need people who are like-minded, like-hearted to be there. And if they are Gentiles who love the Lord and love the Jewish people and love Israel, it can be very supportive for them to be with us. And we hope it will be fruitful for them as well, and that's our goal. But where does a Jewish person go, which is back to the same question we tried to answer in the early 70s. Where does a Jewish person attend services who now believes that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah? That's right. We're still that place after all this time. Yes, after 40, 50 years, we're still that place where a Jew can fully express him or herself and their identity and hope to have some kind of help in raising Jewish children and hopefully then Jewish grandchildren. We're still that place.
Yes, we are.
And nobody else has taken up that mantle, so to speak.
I don't think any other place can. Like you could have like a church that loves like the roots of the faith, but they're not going to unless they actually have like a Jewish pastor who is raised Jewish. They're not really going to be a place that can reinforce that. And even that, I was thinking as you were talking about this reality of that I often remind my students of, there's so many sociological studies that say you become the amalgamation of your 5 closest friends.
Really?
So
interesting.
Who you surround yourself with is phenomenally important, right? And who we surround ourselves with is incredibly important. If you go to a church, you're going to become a church person. You're going to become a Christian. And if you come to a Messianic congregation, you might think that you're becoming a Jew, right? Because of like the Jewish identity that's being reinforced and all of these other things. And it is hard when you have this constant influx of people coming in. Like, how do you educate them that no, they're not becoming Jews? No, this is, yes, a Jewish space, but not necessarily so that all of us as one new man can become Jews. That's not the one new man.
Right.
And it is weird too, because like when you actually look at the distant prophecies, like it kind of does look like we're going to be doing Jewish things, celebrating the festivals in Jerusalem, nations and the Jewish people together, right? That is actually the future vision. But like us trying to like make that happen right now when people are wrestling through their identity and like, oh, what am I before God? Man, that's tough. I don't know how to actually like, and like you're saying, we are still that place. So I don't know how we get Messianic Judaism to do that space with clarity and with focus.
Not continuing the confusion or perpetrating the confusion. But remember Barney Kasdan's books that he put out, God's Appointed Customs and Festivals? Yeah. I think that was, the heart of that was to try to say, yes, we may all be celebrating together. You do need to understand what these festivals are as a Gentile person. But it's not really, we don't really see churches still. Occasionally they will have a Seder or invite some of us in to conduct a Seder for them. But pretty much they're not celebrating any of those things within their body. And we've been doing this for over 50 years. Right. And they're not necessarily bringing it within them. So I think they want to have their identity, but I think where we have the identity within a Messianic synagogue of it being a Jewish space, and I think they're wanting to make sure that they maintain a non-Jewish space pretty much as first century. Right. I know that feels a little harsh to say, but that's kind of what I'm feeling. Your daughter said to me the other day, who's in a Bible-believing college, that her professor on the Old Testament made a statement that made her want to ask him, do you think God is done with the Jewish people?
Right.
Do you think God... And I said, well, think about how you're asking somebody. You don't want to shame him or whatever, but you might ask him privately. And then maybe he might respond to it in the class. But, How many people still think that God is done with the Jewish people and there is no need for identification? There is no need for continuation of the identification.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Oh, every time we have these conversations, Mom, I just feel so like, what is happening? Like, we've been laboring for however many years, since the 70s.
I know.
And we're still in this place. I mean, God is doing things, obviously. Like, there are many pastors who are really trying to grapple with Jewish, the Jewish roots of the faith and the fact that Jesus is a Jew. But yeah, the dismissiveness of Yeshua's people is like just the air that people breathe in churches. I mean, every sermon I listen to, and when I listen to it through the filter of being a Jewish person, I can hear their misunderstanding. I can hear that they don't get it. I can hear that they really don't think that there's any point to what we're doing. And it's like, wow.
I know.
And the synagogue hates what we're doing because they think we're stealing Jewish souls. And then the Gentiles that show up.
We should collaborating with them because they're losing people. They're losing Jewish people too, and we need to have conversations about how to help Jews continue to identify and continue to worship as Jews.
Yeah, but we are the people that are not invited to the table.
I know.
No, like churches don't want to invite us to the table. Synagogues don't want to invite us to the table.
Speaking of which, your dad, Rabbi Rube, used to be invited by the teacher of the Old Testament at that university. And he went in often and spoke. I'm now beginning to think it might be the same professor. Oh. And I think there might be an opportunity for some conversation. I've asked Ellie to ask him if he knows who that is. I wanted to make one quick disclaimer. When you were speaking about something that happened at the Winter Leadership Conference, you made reference to a man that is our president. He is not our president. He's our executive director. Oh, because our president is a different person.
Correct.
I wanted to be sure that people didn't think that was our president who had said that.
That's right.
Not that he necessarily would be concerned about it, but I just felt like it was important to distinguish that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's an important distinction. Well, unfortunately, the bell is about to ring here.
Of course.
So
you're in your classroom.
School will be back in session, and me with it, apparently. So thank you, Mom. It's a great conversation. I do want us to have some guests on soon. We have some people within our community that I would love to come and just hear their testimony and have them talk. Some Jewish people, some intermarried families. I think it'd be really good to kind of keep those conversations going. But I love you.
And also, what about Russell having Russ Resnick come? I see from this Kesher that he's actually retiring as the editor of it. And I would love to have a time to just have a conversation with him that people could hear. Yep. Kind of his heart after all these years of doing what he's doing. Might be really, So anyway.
Okay, well, to everybody watching and or listening, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And if you want to see us again, instead of just listen to us, go to Beth Yeshua SAC, S-A-C, on YouTube or on Spotify, which does the video version. But thank you, Bubby. And will I see you tonight for Shabbat?
Amen. Thank you so much for inviting me. Love it.
Okay. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can always visit bethyeshua.org for more.